Mosses are truly incredible. They're a foundational part of the forest where I live, the Tongass National Forest. A couple weeks ago, I gave a talk on mosses at our local science museum, and I thought you might enjoy it. So here is a version that we edited together just for you. I am so excited to be talking to you about mosses today. By way of introduction, my name is Jenny Bellis. I also go by the name Science Mom. I am a scientist and a mother, and I have a master's degree in plant science. But my master's degree was all in the laboratory, looking at stress-induced flowering and the genes that were responsible for that. And it wasn't until I moved to the Tongass that I got into moss. And this picture here is just a small sample of the beauty and color of mosses. This is sphagnum moss. And when I started identifying mosses, it changed the way I viewed the forest. I took Barbara Morgan's class through UAS Extension, and for part of her class, we had to identify 40 plants. And I thought to myself, I bet nobody has done 40 mosses and liverworts before. That's what I'm going to do. And I started identifying mosses and liverworts, and after I got to about 7, I said, this is really hard. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to 40. But then as I kept learning, it's like the forest opened up, and I got past 40, I got to over 100 now, mosses and liverworts that I know, and it has changed the way that I see the forest. A lot of human beings have what I call plant blindness. They look at different plants that are incredibly diverse, but because they don't know how to recognize the different features, their brain just sort of categorizes it all as, green thing, plant, and you don't notice the differences. Before I started identifying mosses, I had moss blindness. I would look at a scene like this, and my brain would just look at all that green on the ground and say, that's one thing, that's moss. But the Tongass has more than 500 different species of mosses, and now when I walk through the forest, my experience is so much richer. I'm seeing so many good friends, so many different species. And today I'm going to take you through 20 different mosses that are just beautiful and incredible to know about. But first I want to just answer the question, why learn about moss? Why study mosses? First, they are among the oldest of plants on Earth and some of the most resilient. I'm going to show you a short video clip from Dr. Max Bowler's lab at Berkeley, and this is a moss rehydrating after it's been completely dried out. Water is added, and then and this is real time, this is not sped up at all. You can see the leaves absorbing the water, inflating, and the incredible thing is that photosynthesis is happening within minutes, that you can see the color change in real time. Mosses are sometimes called primitive plants, but I don't really think that's fair. They're among the oldest plants, and that means they've had millions of years more than the flowering plants to perfect their design. And one of their incredible skills is that they can dry out completely. They can freeze solid, and then as soon as they rehydrate and conditions are favorable, they immediately start photosynthesizing, and they have more advanced cellular mechanisms to repair the damage than any other category of plants. Think about your house plants and how they would do if you dried them out and stuck them in a drawer for 75 years and then dumped water on them. Would they bounce right back to life? Mosses do, and that's incredible. Their ecological impact on the Tongass is also worthy of an entire Friday Night Insight in and of itself. Simply put, our forest would not exist without them. The 3 most common mosses in the Tongass are stairstep, cattail, and lanky moss. If you just put me in the forest blindfolded and said, I want you to reach out and tell me what moss you're touching, 90% of the time, I could find one of these within just a step or two. They're super common. Cat's tail moss is, in my opinion, it's the mullet of the mosses. It's business on the top and a party on the bottom. There are 2 of the pseudo-Ichthyothecium species, cat's tail and mouse tail. They're difficult to tell apart without a microscope, and most people around here just call it cattail moss. They grow on branches only, not on the ground, always on ground branches or trunks. And the distinguishing feature is that as it grows, it develops these long, stringy kind of tendrils that hang down relatively straight. And when the light is coming through at a sideways angle, they'll just glow and they're really beautiful. Stair-step moss is gorgeous and has a lot of different common names. It's also called splendid feather moss, glittering wood moss, and the scientific name is Hylocomium splendens. Anytime you see splendens as the species name, that's a hint that you're going to be looking at something really beautiful. It almost looks like a fern leaf. And the reason it's called stair-step is because every year it gets one new step. So you can actually take a piece of stair-step moss and you can just count the steps to see how old it is. And it gives the stair-step moss quite the advantage because on the understory of the forest floor, light is a limiting resource. And if you can grow up and over your neighbors, then all of a sudden you're able to dominate. And it grows in massive mats that just cover the forest floor. It will grow up and over logs. It will even hang from branches. It's super abundant. It's often kind of golden in color, and it will grow on the ground, on logs, and on trees. Lanky moss, Rhytidiadelphis laureus, is also one of our most common mosses, and it often forms just massive blankets that, kind of cover everything like a carpet. The stump here is covered almost entirely in lanky moss, and then you can see the little hemlock seedlings growing on the top. Next, we're going to look at some mosses that grow in muskegs or bogs. Sphagnum is an incredible species of moss. It's one of the most ancient lineages. The little island that you see growing in the middle of this pond in a muskeg, that's all sphagnum moss. And the sphagnum moss is really what creates the muskeg and the pond itself. There are more than 300 species of sphagnums worldwide, more than 100 in the Tongass, and a single muskeg or a single bog can easily have more than 30 species. This rainbow of sphagnums that I took, these are all from the same bog, the same day, the same walk that I took. I was just impressed by the color and started trying to take different pictures to put together a collage of colors. They come in green, brown, orange, red. But the distinguishing feature of sphagnum moss is that you have a head called the capitulum, and that just keeps growing and growing and growing pretty much indefinitely. And then the bottom part, as it gets removed from light and all covered up by the rest, it will start to sort of break down, but it's super resistant to both bacteria and fungi, so it doesn't break down very well. And that's what will eventually form peat. If you get a bag of peat moss at the store, it's really just old dead sphagnum moss. And to identify the different types of sphagnum, the easiest way to start is by looking at the head from the top and asking yourself, do the little branches go out all in the same direction, or all in different directions? Or are they parted like a star? Do you have like a 5-parted pattern? That's one of the helpful things in learning how to identify sphagnum. Rusty peat moss, Sphagnum fuchsium, is one of the easiest ones to first learn how to identify because it's super, super thick. The branches are packed together so tightly that if you pick up a single strand, it just almost looks like it's messy, just this noodle of brown. And the stem is really dark, and the color is a very brown color, and the branches are thick. This sphagnum creates hummocks. If you ever are in a muskeg and you see like a big pile of peat moss with bushes and things growing out of it, 9 times out of 10, it is this sphagnum that is making that. White-toothed peat moss is the sphagnum that tends to grow in the forest among other mosses. And I don't find it in peat bogs or in muskegs very often. It's usually in the understory underneath trees. It has that 5-parted branching. A cool fact about sphagnum moss is that it acts like a sponge. Many of the cells in the sphagnum moss are dead and hollow. They're like giant water balloons, well, giant from the perspective of the cell, and they have little holes in them so that they can absorb water when conditions are wet and then sort of hold on to it. If you pick up a handful of wet sphagnum moss and just squeeze it, water will just pour out of it in usually like a good half cup of water from just a little handful of moss. So these mosses really do act like a water controlling system for the forest. They absorb water when it's wet, They release it slowly when conditions are dry and help the forest to keep its water. Small red peat moss I also have over here if you want to look at a sample. Its round head is a lot smaller than some of the other mosses. It has a beautiful red color and it's incredibly absorbent. It was one of the species that many First Nation tribes around North America used for diapering their infants because it would absorb moisture so well. Ostrich plume moss is not a sphagnum moss, but it's one that I've only observed in muskegs. It has a beautiful yellow color, and every single leaf is curled, beautifully curved. You can kind of see the detail of that in this picture where I'm holding it up in my hand. Next, we're going to go to look at 5 mosses that grow on wood, either on branches or on logs. And if you're thinking to yourself, wow, like I can't believe these pictures, I've never seen these mosses, I'd encourage you to just pause every now and then and look closer, because so many details will emerge if you just take the time to pause and look a little closer. Crinkle leaf tree moss, by the way, that's a common name that I totally made up because its scientific name is Neckera douglasii, and its common name right now in most books that I look it up in, it just says Douglas's Neckera for the common name, and I think crinkle leaf tree moss is way better, but just so you know. This one only grows on trees, and every leaf is wavy. It just undulates up and down. There are 2 purposes to that. One is that in low light conditions, no matter what direction the light is coming from, some part of the leaf will be angled to catch it. And the other is that that wavy pattern helps to move water along the moss. It will also form curtains that hang from branches, just like cattail moss does, but these look thicker. They don't taper down into that, mullet-like fringe at the bottom. And they tend to kind of have this swooping action where they swoop out. Pendulous hanging moss is most often the moss that if you look at a branch and you're like, whoa, they're like soccer balls of moss stuck to that branch, usually it's this one. It tends to like areas that are near water, I found. And part of the reason that it forms those big kind of balls of moss is because it has a lot of branches. And if you look with a microscope, there are 3 faint midribs on every leaf. If you want to get into identifying mosses, having a microscope is really helpful because some of them you can identify just by looking at them kind of on the bigger scale. But for a lot of them, to be sure of the ID, you need a microscope. Fan moss is a favorite of mine. This one is really abundant as well, and it often just completely covers logs. So especially like, a log that's fallen on the forest floor and been there for a while, you can often find just blankets of fan moss, and they form what are called gemma cups. These look like flowers, and this is how it gets its common name, fan moss, but what it is not a flower. Mosses are not flower plants. They never produce flowers. Instead, they produce spores. But these little gemma cups have little fragments of plant that can get splashed out by rain and then just clone. It's like cloning itself. And those little fragments will grow into a new moss. Waved silk moss is a very light green color compared to some of the other mosses. If you're ever walking along, especially at the base of a stump, and you see a moss that kind of surprises you because it looks really light green, it could be this one. It often forms really sort of long strands, and just like crinkle leaf tree moss, one of my favorite mosses, if you look with a little hand lens, you'll see that the leaves wave. They kind of undulate up and down. And that's how it got its name, waved silk moss, because of that kind of pattern to the leaves. I've almost always found this one on dead stumps or at the base of live trees, but I've very rarely found it growing in soil. It's almost always on wood. Coiled leaf moss, this one was hard for me to find. In all of my moss books, I kept reading that it was one of the most dominant and common mosses in the Tongass. And I read phrases saying that it grew on every rotten log, and I started to get really frustrated. I was like, you're lying to me because I cannot find this And it's because my scale was wrong. I was looking for a big moss. I want you to notice that's a hemlock needle right there in the middle of that moss. And so that helps you kind of appreciate how small it is. And once I realized, oh, I'm looking for something that is super small, then I saw it everywhere. But it has a different color depending on whether it's growing in full shade or full sun. In the sun, it will be almost kind of a brown color, and in the shade, it will be sort of greenish. The microphone seems to be doing something kind of weird. Is it cutting out? Okay. Coiled leaf moss, you can see the size is super, super small. If you look at my finger there, you can see how tiny it is. But one of its distinguishing features is just, again, how coiled those leaves are. And that's the Hypnums genus. Every member of the Hypnum genus has super coiled leaves. And pretty much any log in the Tongass that is really rotten, if you look closely, you can usually find this one. Next, we have 4 mosses that grow along trails and roadsides. These specialize in disturbed areas, and you can find them especially along Ward Creek or any dirt road. They'll be abundant. Badge moss looks kind of like our fan moss, but the leaves are pointed, and they've got this beautiful midrib. This one also has really tall sporophytes, and it's fairly big. It'll be, a couple inches tall sometimes. There are sharp teeth at the leaf edge, and then the leaves kind of attach to the stem. And I think the key to getting excited about mosses is to realize that they have just as much diversity and beauty as the big plants. All it takes is sort of pausing and looking close. Menzies tree moss is one of my favorites. It only grows in the Tongass. There are other species of tree moss in the same genus that grow in other forests, but this one is specific to the Tongass National Forest, and it also loves disturbed areas. And it looks like a whole bunch of tiny little palm trees growing side by side. If you pick up just a little piece of it, you'll see this stem and then a literal tuft of trees. It's really sort of adorable, and in the spring, it puts out bright green new growth shoots that are really pretty. It will also form these little gemma-cups or antheridia that will splash out spores and to reproduce. So sometimes you'll see beautiful, almost flower-looking structures as well. Hoary rock moss is super abundant along the Whitman Trail and along roadsides, but it will only grow on rock that has a correct pH for it. Its distinguishing feature is quite a yellow color. It looks really yellow. And if you look closely, all of the leaves kind of fade to a clear tip that's transparent. The haircap mosses are abundant. We've got 4 or 5 different species that grow in the forest, and they can be kind of hard to tell apart, but they almost look like little miniature pine trees kind of growing out of the ground. Juniper haircap moss has leaf edges that enroll. You can see on this picture over here that's close up how the leaf kind of comes over and in, and that helps to trap water and retain water. Mosses are kind of unique because they tend to just match whatever the water conditions of the environment are. If things are dry, they can dry out completely and go dormant, but if things are wet, then they're doing photosynthesis. And a lot of them have developed structures like this to trap water and kind of hold on to it so that they can extend their photosynthetic period. It has sporophytes, just like all mosses do, that will produce spores. These ones start out upright, and then once they're mature, they'll kind of bend over, and the sporophyte acts almost like a little pepper shaker. It's full of spores that then will kind of drift out. And next, we have 4 common mosses that grow on the ground. This one right here is called clear moss, and it's one I've only been able to find twice, so I get very excited anytime I see it. And you can see the Hyloconium splendids, or the stair-step moss, kind of growing next to it, and then its If you're walking by fast, you might not notice that it looks different, but if you look close, it has leaves that are transparent. They're only 1 cell thick. I'll show you a picture in just a minute, but there's so many different mosses that often are intermingled, and part of the fun of learning the mosses is then to see the way that they interweave and grow together. Oregon-beaked moss is quite common on roadsides as well, often mixed in with the Menzies tree moss, and it has beautiful symmetry, almost a fern-like frond where the branches come off at very regular intervals. But the one that we saw first that was yellow that grows in muskegs, ostrich plume moss, that one has curved leaves that really bend, and Oregon-beaked moss doesn't. Its leaves are pretty straight. And the microscopic view here kind of shows you the leaves on both. Bent leaf moss is one that's very small. If you look at my fingertip there on the other side, that kind of gives you an idea of scale. It looks like little tiny pipe cleaners just sticking up out of the ground, and to me has sort of an adorable appearance. It also, like lanky moss, it will sort of like run and kind of cover areas in little mats, but every so often along that stem, there will be this pipe cleaner-like part that sticks up and has all of the leaves that go out and bend, and that gives it its common name. We just have 2 more mosses left. I know I've gone through these fairly quickly, but I wanted to be sure that we had time for some questions and discussion. But the last 2 are 2 of my favorites. This one is called apple moss because the sporophytes that they form in the spring are round and really do look like adorable miniature green apples on sticks. Every time I find this, I get super excited and I stop and have to take a whole bunch of pictures. There are a couple spots that I know of around town, and I can't wait to check them out every spring because these are just too adorable. The apple moss is a moss that always forms the sporophyte at the tip of the growing branch. And so if you kind of pick it up to check and see, okay, what's going on? What does the structure look like? It's like a bunch of just single long stems that go down, and then at the bottom you have all this kind of orange material because the little old leaves and hairs get sort of orange at the bottom. And then last but not least, we have clear moss. This is the one that I've only been able to find twice, 2 locations. And the thing I love about clear moss is that every leaf is it's only 1 cell thick. And with just a hand lens, you can see some of the detail of the cells. If you look at it with a hand lens, it almost looks like you're looking at like a stained glass window because you can see the cellular structure a bit and it reflects light in just a beautiful way. Before I open it up to questions, just kind of to sum up, I want to encourage you to pause when you're hiking and look at the detail of the moss, because mosses are some of the most ancient plants on earth in that they've been around the longest. But what that means is they've had time to really perfect their design of being the absolute toughest plants around. They can dry out completely. As I mentioned at the beginning, there have been specimens dried in herbarium drawers for decades that then will rehydrate instantly when you put water on them and start growing. And for our Tongass rainforest, the forest wouldn't be here without them. They have played an incredible role in nutrient cycling, in controlling the flow of water, and in supporting plants. But I wanted to just have some time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? That is a great question. So the question was, a lot of these look like ferns or little succulents. What actually classifies them as moss? It's really about their cellular structure and the way they reproduce. A succulent is going to produce flowers. Mosses don't produce flowers. There's no such thing as a flowering moss. They produce by making spores. And they also don't move water through them the same way that ferns and other plants like trees do, where they can have roots and they pull up water and send it to leaves. Mosses often move water outside their body. Like the Douglas neckera that I showed you, the crinkle leaf moss that has the wavy leaves, those wavy leaves, when it gets wet, will just, just through like surface tension, they'll move water along the leaves rather than moving it through internally. But the real feature that distinguishes mosses from other plants is that they produce a sporophyte, like those little stalks here. That is the sporophyte. And this part of the moss, the part that we usually think of when we look at the moss that's green and has leaves, it only has one copy of every chromosome. And then the sporophyte, that little stalk with the little green apple, that is the diploid part that has 2 copies of each chromosome. It's sort of opposite of the way that animals work. I mean, if you want to like take the analogy to animals, it would be as if sperm and egg were free living things, and then the human being was like only around for a week or 2. And then you went back to just free living sperm and egg. So it's very different than other plants. If I was a moss, what moss would I be and why? Can I have like one for each main category of mosses? No. Okay, if I was a sphagnum moss, I would definitely be rusty peat moss, the one that forms the hummocks, because hummocks are awesome and they provide like, okay, have you ever noticed a hummock in a muskeg? Like when you're walking along, it's like, whoa, there's like a big pile of stuff. Have you ever tried to reach inside a hummock? Oh my gosh, it's weird. So you start like digging in, and it's like, okay, it's just rusty peat moss. And you think you're gonna hit a rock or a log or something? No, it's rusty peat moss all the way down. Like that peat moss just made this, like, sometimes they can be huge, like 4 feet high. And it's also like so adorably fat. It's like, I don't know how to, like, you have to like find a hummock sometime and just pull out a single strand so you can be amazed, because each of the branches, all the other peat mosses are like, I'm delicate and wavy like a Dr. Seuss tree, and rusty peat moss is like, okay, first thing in your moss discovery kit would be, there's an online version of this as well, but the mosses and liverworts in the National Forest in Alaska, this has a very not gonna overwhelm you right away number of each and some great descriptions. So you can pick this up at the Forest Service here in town, or you can just get it online. A jeweler's loop for sure, and I've got one up here that you can check out afterwards. Just helps you to get more detail. And then my third thing for starting out would be to get yourself a copy of Pochard and McKinnon's Plants of the Pacific Northwest, because it has an excellent section on mosses, and it gives some really great information into each type before it kind of tells you how to identify different ones. iNaturalist, I can't believe I didn't say that first. If you haven't already used iNaturalist, it is a free app for your phone, and you can take a picture and then it will tell you what it thinks that plant is. If you have a good picture, you usually get set in a very good direction. Every now and then with a poor picture, it'll just tell you, you've identified a plant. And you're like, thank you, I know I'm looking at a plant. If it has a confidence interval of over 95%, I've never seen it be wrong in my personal experience. When I go to my books and I double check, if it's over 95% confidence, the iNaturalist ID has always been correct. So that would also be a great place to start. When I say we wouldn't have a forest because of the mosses, if we didn't have moss, here are sort of 3 reasons why. So if you just took the Tongass and said we're getting rid of all of the moss, the next time it rained, it would be a catastrophe. You would basically lose a lot of your soil. The next time it got really dry, it would also be a catastrophe, because the moss kind of acts like a blanket over the soil, protecting it from drying out. And then in the trees in our forest, nitrogen is one of their biggest limiting nutrients. The mosses and the liverworts play a really important role in making nitrogen, helping it to be available to trees. And if we took them away, like those 3 reasons, you really wouldn't be able to have trees here in the same way. All right, thank you everyone.